Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Welcome to Love and Abuse. All information on the show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being. And today we're going to go over some message I received a few months back. And this message has to do with something I talked about before. And today's topic is going to be about sort of analyzing the message and helping you identify the components that make up manipulation and control and emotional abuse, all of the toxic behavior that makes up some relationships out there. And if you've tuned into this show, you're either a part of a relationship like that, or you know someone in a relationship like that, and you want to get more information and hopefully help either yourself or someone else, or maybe you're here to help your partner. I've heard many people listen to this show and they want to play these episodes to their partners, or they get the mean workbook and they want to show their partner, look, this is what you're doing to me. This is tricky. It is tricky when you have a partner or anyone that qualifies as toxic in your life. And it's tricky to say, this is what you're doing to me, and I would like you to stop. You may not use those words, but in general, please stop doing this to me. This is what you're doing. This is how much it hurts, and I don't like it, and it feels like you don't love me, and it feels like you don't respect me, and all of those things. A lot of us maybe wouldn't be able to say because it's a scary place to go. Some people are very afraid of saying things like this. It's very upfront. It's very direct. But sometimes it's necessary if you want to change the relationship. And if you're in any type of controlling or manipulative relationship, or someone is just being emotionally abusive, whether they know it or not, it's important to tell them what they're doing, or at least how you feel. It's probably more important to tell them how you feel. So the what they're doing part may not even apply, because when you tell them what they're doing, they might take offense to it and become defensive, or point the finger back at you. Because it is hard for some people that have fears and insecurities, and they want to control people, and they want to be dominating or hurtful to people, because they don't want to face their own fears. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to bring it up. They don't want to express things that are going on inside of them. So they bottle it up, and it comes out in other ways, like controlling and manipulating. And so these people walk around and they don't want to hear what they're doing wrong. Some of them, they don't want to hear what they're doing wrong. They want to hear what you're going to do to change. What are you going to do to satisfy me so that I don't have to change? That might be something that they say. An emotionally abusive person might really focus on wanting you to change and always conform to what they want so that they don't have to face themselves. That's really a huge part of emotional abuse, is the person doing it doesn't want to face themselves, because facing themselves means they would have to change something about themselves. And if they are in control of everything about themselves, or at least they think they are, then losing that control is scary as heck. And so they don't want to lose that control that they have over themselves. It's a perceived control. And they want to control others to give them that sense of security. This is one possible perspective. Well, it is a perspective for some people. Maybe it's not for you. Maybe it is. Typically, emotional abuse involves wanting to manipulate and control others so that you don't have to change yourself. And that's how it starts. You come out of your family with some perhaps dysfunction, and then these dysfunctions have to translate into the real world, the adult world, and you bring them into other relationships, other families, and then suddenly things are going downhill, And the person in control wants to keep that control because if they lose it, they feel bad. So let's just make everyone else feel bad. I'm kind of putting them down a little bit. I don't mean to single them out because I've been through this. When I was emotionally abusive, I wanted to control. It was a lot easier for me to not have to change and make others change for me. And whatever way possible I could do that, it was just easier to live my life like that. At least what I thought in the moment, it was easier. In reality, it was the worst thing I could possibly have done because it systematically destroys relationships. It dissolves love. It instills fear. Not always fear, but it instills a feeling of, I guess it is fear. I mean, when my wife left me, she didn't feel safe at all around me. She couldn't be herself around me. So what she probably ended up doing was grew fearful around me, walking on eggshells, not sure if I was going to give her the silent treatment or give her that look or say something that made her feel guilty or bad about herself. And so that's challenging when you have someone that is capable of doing that to you because they don't want to look inward and they don't want to heal. I did want to look inward and I thought I was, but because my wife never left sooner, I never felt it was important enough to address it sooner. And that's how the breakdown happens, is that we're with someone that we tell them what they're doing to us. And we say, look, you're hurting me and I wish you would stop. Or every time you get upset, I get afraid to even talk to you about things. Could we just talk about this normally? Could we have a normal conversation for once? That's what it feels like. You never have normal conversations. It's always something difficult about it. But it's never difficult enough to go, you know what? I can't stand it. I got to get out of this. It's just enough to believe that there's still something more that can be pulled out of the relationship, still something to hold on to, something positive about it. And that's how I saw things. When I was the emotionally abusive one in my relationship, I saw many positive things to pull out of it. So it was never enough for me to feel like I had to change. And this works both ways, of course. The victim of abuse and control sometimes goes through and becomes so resilient to the toxic behavior that all the good times, which are far and few between, but they happen, they get amplified in their head. You might see the good times as amplified, like, oh, it's so great to have a wonderful day. This is the first wonderful day in months, you might say. Hopefully not, but it might be your reality. This is the first wonderful day I've had in months. And then you think, well, maybe this relationship is worth salvaging. Maybe it is worth saving. And then you have another bad day. And so the person that is perpetrating the control and manipulation or emotional abuse never gets a taste of what it would be like if they go too far. They go just far enough, but never too far because you're still there, because there's no accountability. And because there's no accountability, they don't feel the incentive to change because they haven't changed yet and you're still there. And so they stick around. And I've told that story before, is that no matter how hard you try to convince them, no matter what you do to try to change their mind, they're not really changing because the accountability isn't great enough, so they don't have enough incentive. And it's sad to think that, yes, the incentive might be that you have to say, look, if you don't stop, I'm leaving. And then they finally realize, oh, my behavior is that bad. I speak from experience in that one, unfortunately. I literally had to hear my wife say that she wanted to separate for a while in order for me to understand that my behavior was causing so many problems in the relationship. And of course, it's helpful for me to look in my past and see all the people that broke up with me to realize that, oh, I'm the common denominator. I see what's going on here now. Even though I couldn't pinpoint before that everyone left me and the reason they left me was because of me, my logic was they left me because they had issues. They left me because they couldn't stay in love as long as I could. They left me because XYZ. I always found a reason that they left me. And it was easier to look at it that way because looking at myself, taking responsibility, taking the blame, or at least admitting where I was at fault, that involves changing at a deeper level. And that's very difficult to do when you have learned to be manipulative or emotionally abusive all your life because you don't know any other way. And so I do have compassion for people that are the emotional abusers as well, as long as they care. If you're an emotional abuser and you don't care, then I don't care about you. I'm sorry. I mean, you have to care. You have to be empathetic. You have to have compassion. And if you have those things, if you actually care about other people, at least the people closest to you, and you are controlling and manipulative because of any insecurities or fears that you have, or you're not wanting to address anything going on inside of you, or you have some old trauma that you haven't resolved, then I absolutely care about you. And I absolutely want to help you heal. I want you to know that you can heal, that you can move past this. But it does involve full acceptance of your role in all this. And you may be the primary person doing it. Because I think there are 2 or 3 types of people that listen to this show. Mostly the victims of emotional abuse and control and manipulation. Partially the abusers themselves. And I hate to use the word abusers because it is a loaded word, like I said in the last episode. But emotional abuse is abuse. It is taking away someone's power. It is dominating over them in some way. It is making them feel bad. And so it's injecting suffering where there doesn't need to be any suffering. So those 2 people, the victims and the perpetrators. And then there's the third type that are just interested in what all this is about. I don't know what emotional abuse is. I never thought my significant other was abusive or my family member was abusive. I didn't know that was called control. I didn't know they were manipulating. There are those type 2 that are just getting their feet wet and wondering, oh my God, what else do I need to know? I got to listen to the other episodes and figure this out because I'm just learning about all of this now. That's tough too. I hear from people like that who say, I listened to your show and for the first time ever, I finally figured out what was happening in my relationship. I get that. I mean, it's difficult to explain what's happening to someone else in an emotionally abusive relationship because they don't understand what you're describing is actually abusive. Because what ends up happening is that the individual behavior that you're describing may not be seen as bad by itself, but as a component of a bigger picture. It adds up, it compounds, and after weeks, months, and years of this behavior repeated over and over and over again, then it's abuse. Then it is definitely a relationship that is experiencing a lot of toxic behavior. And that behavior is not necessarily recognized as abusive because, the water boils slowly and you don't feel it until it's so hot. And that means something really major has to happen before you finally jump out of the water and look down and go, oh my God, it was boiling that whole time. I didn't realize that. What am I doing? My body is burning. It's 1st and 3rd degree emotional burns. You want to get out of that. And, I don't promote getting out of a relationship or staying in a relationship in this show. I want to get you to a place of empowerment so that you make the right choice for you and whatever works for you. Plus, I don't know your situation. You could be in a very benign situation compared to someone else who's in a very physically violent situation. To you, it may not be benign, but to the relationship that experiences physical violence, you can't just tell someone to leave because it could be dangerous. It could be deadly. So this is why it's important to gather resources, plan your strategy, start to build your own foundation, maybe without the other person's knowledge. You may have to start building your foundation without the other person's knowledge. And, I get people that write to me and say, hey, look, I have no money. I can't buy your workbook. I can't pay for anything. I can't pay for therapy. And absolutely, my heart goes out to you. Just want to make sure if you're in that position, you need to know that money is one of those resources that if you're not building it, you're going to have a hard time with everything else as well. Because money is one of those resources that helps you get more resources. And if you don't have any, I'm just going to say this between you and I, you might have to start your own private account. And that could be dangerous advice. That could be dangerous advice, because if so-and-so finds out, then what? So I don't mean to instill more fear in you, because I know that's scary, but you might have to work something out. You might have to have someone else with a bank account that you can put money into their account, privately or cash. The workbook talks about how to start building up your foundational resources so that no matter what decision you make, you'll have enough resources to move forward. And if you don't have money now and you can't get money now, yes, there are solutions. Yes, there are battered women's shelters and maybe battered men's shelters. And I know men and women both face this. I'm not trying to single anyone out, but there are shelters. There are people that can help. There are hotlines. There are websites. There are all kinds of resources out there that are free to help you establish your foundational resources. But that is important. If you are under some sort of financial abuse where someone else controls all the money, then one of the empowering steps I need you to do is to try to find a way to make money. Not to buy my workbook, not to buy therapy, but to start taking care of yourself. You need to start really investing in yourself, because if you're in a situation that's so bad that you have no foundational resources and all of your reliance comes from someone that has control over you, and I know this is a huge step and I know there's a lot involved, but you do need to strategize in your head at least. Start to plan a way to empower yourself. The workbook talks about how you can be manipulated when you are low on emotional, physical, and financial resources. Meaning, if your emotional state and your physical state and your financial state are not stable, at least at the most minimal level, then what you end up doing is depending on someone else for all your needs. And if that someone else is the person that is being abusive toward you, then it feels almost impossible to get out from under that. So it does involve getting more secure in yourself and learning to trust yourself and learning to trust your instincts and going forward, increasing your self-confidence. But I know those are all big steps. And I know it seems like for some people, it's such a big leap that they can't imagine ever getting there. So this is why it's important to keep finding resources like this, keep listening to shows, reading websites, reading books, and making sure you're always arming yourself with information and more resources. Because self-empowerment, getting out of these situations, or at least to a place where you can say, no more, I will not do this anymore. That often involves taking steps that you're afraid to take, that you don't want to take, that you don't think you can take, but always moving in that direction. And you may have to do it without someone else's knowledge. So I realize that is difficult for some people. Some people are so isolated that they have no access to almost anything. Fortunately, the internet exists in many places, internet cafes, libraries, so you can at least surf safely. So those are extreme cases. I don't normally talk about extreme cases on this show. But if you are extremely isolated, extremely controlled like that, that might involve some more professional help. That might involve a hotline on the web that you need to call. There's a website that I'm going to mention later. I'll just mention it now. It's called helpguide.org. And Help Guide helps you get out of a more severe situation or more severe physically dangerous relationship. So if you're in that space, at least you have a resource there. But do your best to stabilize what you can so that you have something to launch off of. If you have nothing to launch off of, then even if you found $1,000 to buy the best course out there, or someone gave it to you for free, or someone gave you therapy for free, you may not have the building blocks to take the next step. That's why it's important to take the first step. And that first step does sometimes involve something that seems impossible. That's why it's important to have a support system as well. You have to have friends that understand and that know what you're going through. Or make friends, find support groups that know what you're going through. Again, that's really extreme, and some people are experiencing that. That's who I was talking to in the last few minutes. But some people aren't in such extreme situation. They're in a little less extreme situations. It seems extreme to them because they're going through it. If you're listening now and you're going through a bad time with your relationship, you might resonate with some of this and you might not. But maybe you'll resonate with something I'm going to read to you, and I'm going to make comments on as I read it. It's an email that I received a few months back, like I said earlier, and it is kind of an analysis of emotional abuse. So I'm just going to read through this. This person said, "I'm struggling to reach a conclusion about whether or not how much my boyfriend is emotionally abusive and if I should leave. He didn't show any signs of his angry, highly defensive, critical, controlling behavior in the first couple of years. I saw a glimpse or two, but he quickly apologized." So that's interesting. Let me make a comment right now is that if a relationship has gone on for a couple of years and the abusive behavior hasn't come out, or at least maybe in small glimpses, then it's unlikely that he was intentionally wanting to hurt you. Because what ends up happening is that abusive behavior usually shows itself in the first couple months, like 2 to 6 months. It's typically the average, but usually the first couple months. And when it shows itself, it gets worse and worse and worse. For this person to write to me and say it was 2 years before she started seeing any behavior like that, that tells me that something inside him must have shifted. Maybe he got upset about something she said and he repressed it. He held back. Maybe he's been harboring anger or resentment and he doesn't want to talk about it because maybe he doesn't want to connect with his emotions on it. So instead of expressing it, how much it hurt him, he lashes out. He becomes destructive in other ways. So right off the bat, after 2 years of not seeing the behavior, something changed. And I would ask this person who wrote to me, what happened after 2 years? Or when you first started seeing the behavior? Did you get into a fight? Did you argue about something? Was it ever resolved? It would be interesting to find out if there was something that had never been resolved and his behavior got worse and worse from there. It doesn't excuse his behavior. He shouldn't be doing this. He should be absolutely expressing and sharing what's going on in him. But if he doesn't want to do that and he instead lashes out and he's destructive in other ways, then he needs to take responsibility for that. But it would be interesting to find out if something happened in the relationship after 2 years for him to shift like that. I'm not giving him a break here. He might actually still be cold and mean, and I don't know, but 2 years is kind of an unusual length of time. So that's why I'm mentioning it. And I also want to mention that displays of anger, they help get controlling people what they want. So I'm not sure about him. I'm only going by a glimpse of your life here. But the more angry a controlling person gets, the more likely you are to give in and give them what they want. And also, if he's highly defensive, like you said, critical and controlling, highly defensive people that are also angry and controlling, that's another tactic. I mean, if they're defensive enough, you'll either grow afraid that it'll escalate or you'll reconsider your position. Because after all, why would someone be so defensive unless they were actually right? So people that get highly defensive, they're either trying to make you afraid that it'll escalate so you'll give in, or they want you to believe that, oh, they're so defensive that they must be right. Maybe they really believe what they're saying, and maybe I'm wrong. So that can happen. And of course, there's the part where if he's critical and judgmental about you and your behavior, that keeps you on the defense so that it takes the focus off of him. These are just tiny little things that some people do that keeps them out of the spotlight. So you go on to say, on the one hand, he is kind, caring, supportive, empathetic, but he can be equally cruel and shout at me and blow up if I so much as suggest he do something different. When I hear that, I think, okay, so the happy times really aren't happy. They are better than the unhappy times, but you still walk around on eggshells, never knowing if one wrong move or one wrong word is going to set them off. And so I look at a relationship like that. If you're walking around more unhappy than you are happy, or you're always walking around on eggshells, there's not much substance to the relationship. There's a lot of fear in there, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But That is not enjoyable. That's not a nice way to have a relationship, because you can't fully let your guard down. You can't fully connect, and you can't fully be happy because you never know what's going to happen next. She goes on, when I get upset, he tells me I am ruining his time and that I should be considerate of how my emotions weigh on him and make him feel guilty. So this sounds like to me that you're not allowed to be upset, only he is. And unfortunately, that's part of the control. He's keeping the playing field uneven. He gives himself all these allowances that he won't allow you to have. Emotional abuse often involves the person abusing calling you out as the one who's doing the behavior, not them. That keeps you defensive as well. That keeps the focus on you. That doesn't mean you don't do any of the behavior. Sometimes the victim ends up being manipulative to get their needs met or to make their point because it seems that's the only language the abuser speaks. However, if the abuser is actually willing to look inward as needing and wanting to heal, not just apologize, but accept that their behavior is hurting you and the relationship, and they want to talk about it with you and they want help, you may have a chance. You may have a chance of saving things. However, if he's only concerned about you fixing yourself and you changing, and he's not willing to work at the relationship, then you don't have a chance. I hate to say that. I mean, if there's no effort on the other person's part to work on things, and there's no sign that they take any responsibility for anything going wrong, then there's less of a chance of saving it. So she goes on, my only option would be to leave and go back to this city, and I won't tell you the city, without a job or a place to live, which feels very scary, especially as my self-worth is at an all-time low. All right, let me comment here. If your self-worth is dissolving, then you're in the opposite of a relationship. People in a relationship are supposed to lift each other up. They make each other feel valued and worthy. If you're getting the opposite, then you're not in a relationship. You're an emotional slave to bad behavior. And it's important that you free yourself before your low self-worth turns into no self-worth. Because without that, what do you have? If you don't feel worthy at all, you don't feel worthy of anything, then you have so little spirit left that you end up reaching out to the only person that might just show up as nice one day and lift your spirit. And of course, that's the emotional abuser or the controller or the manipulator. And when they're nice for that moment, you suck it up, you absorb it, you love it, but then they become upset again or they become controlling again. And now you're in the same boat. And the cycle doesn't end until you end it. That doesn't mean ending the relationship. Like I said, I don't want to just push you one direction or another. But it does start with some sort of accountability. For example, saying something like, if you don't start treating me nicer, I'm going to leave. That could be a good start. But I hesitate giving you that advice because of the next thing that you say in your letter, which is, thinking of breaking up with him scares me as I think he would get extremely angry. Now, this is where we come in with what might turn into a more dangerous situation. If you're truly scared, then you definitely need to move into a safer space away from this person. Fear of the person you're with is so far away from a real relationship. And it really comes back to the emotional slavery reference I made earlier. When your decisions are based on a real fear of your partner's responses, you seriously need to consider getting out of the toxic environment. And I'm going to mention this website again, helpguide.org. There are others out there too, but they had a good page on getting away from a physically or aggressive person. And read those steps. Read those steps, because when you plan your next step, you're going to need the resources. You're going to need the information. You need to exit safely. Relationships are not supposed to be built on a fear of the other person. Period. If you think you have a relationship with someone you are afraid of, that's not a relationship. That's needless suffering. So keep that in mind. You should not be afraid of the person you're supposed to be in a relationship with. Otherwise, that is not a relationship. All right, a few more lines here. Recently, in front of other people, he cut me off and said that they didn't need to hear what I was saying. This was profoundly upsetting and humiliating to me. All right, I really want to comment on that right now, but I'm going to read the rest of this email, and then I'll come back and comment on that. He always has a great explanation afterward, and he implies that I'm over-exaggerating or misinterpreting the situation, And recently he started telling me I am never sorry. He does sometimes cool off afterward and apologize, but I'm made to feel everything is mostly my fault for any number of reasons. How do I get a clear-headed sense of what's going on? Should I invest more time and energy into the relationship, giving him the benefit of the doubt, or is this a toxic relationship that I need to leave for my own good? I think I'm beginning to go crazy. All right, thank you so much to the person who wrote that email. Sorry this is so late, but I can't get to my emails for several months. But I know this is a situation that other people are in. And if you're still in this, the person who wrote this, I'm hoping this is helping you. But let me make a couple comments here. So you said recently in front of other people, he cut me off and said they didn't need to hear what I was saying. This was profoundly upsetting and humiliating to me. So you have someone that humiliates you, cuts you off in front of others, basically treating you like a child. And I'm not sure how much you need to hear, but think of your life before this relationship. If I told you, hey, I found a great guy, you're going to love him. He gets really angry and scary sometimes, but he's also super sweet. Also, if you give him your opinion on something, he totally loses it and wants things his way. Oh, and also, when you're enjoying conversations with him and other people, he saves you a lot of time by cutting you off and letting everyone know how unimportant you are to him and the rest of the world. So what do you say? Do you want to meet him? I think I know your answer. If you never met him, your answer would probably be no. Mine would be no. Hopefully it's no. Hopefully you don't want to be treated like that. So if the answer is no, then you really have to question yourself why you're in it now. If you know what's going to happen, if I get into this relationship, this will be my experience, then you would say no. And now that you're in it and you know it is happening, why does the answer change? And I know some people will say, yeah, but we have such good times together and I love him. And there might be fear. I'm afraid if I leave, this will happen, or I don't have any resources, or there could be 1,000,001 different excuses. But the reason I'm asking this, why are you there, is because you asked me if you should invest more time and energy into the relationship, or if you should leave for your own good. And so I leave that answer up to you. When I outline this person that I want you to date, which is just a made up scenario, I say this person does all these things that you just described to me. If your answer is no, then you know your answer. If I said, yeah, but you're going to have these amazing, wonderful days. I mean, you might even have a week of no drama and no stress, a whole week. But all this other stuff still exists. Would you say yes? And so this is a very important question to ask yourself if you're in a situation right now where the answer to, hey, would you like to meet this person who has all these characteristics? If you answered no, then you know the answer you may not want to face. So that's a tough thing because now you have to do something about it. That is the big step, right? What I'm saying is that you have to start in your mind. Your mind is the safest place because you can think anything you want and you can start planning anything you want. And your mind helps you start moving in the direction you want. But your mind is also the place where you have to get clear about what you want. You set the intention, you see the visualization. It sounds like the law of attraction kind of stuff, but there's a lot of helpful information when you visualize what you want to do that you come up with. It's sort of like when my girlfriend and I used to go camping. I would visualize myself arriving at the campsite. I would actually go through this entire visualization. I would arrive at the campsite. What's the first thing I'm going to do? Well, I'm going to shut my truck off. I'm going to put it in park. I'm going to put the e-brake on. I'm going to open the door. And now we got to set up the tent. So where is the tent? So I'm going through this visualization. Oh yeah, the tent's in that box in the back. I'm going to open up that box in the back and I'm going to reach inside and get the tent. And I am thinking, okay, how do we set up the tent? The tent has all these poles and the tent has a mattress that goes inside. Do we have the mattress? Do we have the poles? And so as I'm going through this sequential order of events in my mind, I'm figuring out what I need along the way. And more times than not, this has helped me remember something that I would have forgotten in almost all scenarios. You can do this. This is what I tell people to do when they're thinking about leaving the relationship or taking some time off or something. Go through each and every single minute step. All right, I'm going to get on the phone and I'm going to call my sister and I'm going to tell her. And my sister's going to say this and I'm going to say this. And if she says, yes, you can stay here. Or if she says, no, you can't, what am I going to do next? How will I go through that? What am I going to experience? How am I going to feel? It may sound like a lot of work, but if you're in the relationship now and you need to kind of escape some of the drama, it's kind of nice to have this little area, this safe place in your mind. Because once you set those neurons in motion, you're going to discover things that maybe you didn't realize that you could get, like a resource, or do like a step, like a decision, and suddenly you'll have more ideas. So even if you know that everything I'm talking about, any next big move is impossible, start the next step or the first step in your mind. And so to the person who wrote this email, no, you're not going crazy. You're making yourself crazy by trying to rationalize what's happening. You're making yourself crazy by trying to figure out if this is a salvageable relationship. You go crazy because you're not sure what steps you should take, even though you probably already know the answer. And I have a feeling if you tell him, look, I don't like that you get upset, that you get angry, that you don't give me a chance to talk, that you cut me off. I don't like all these things. I feel disrespected. I don't feel like an equal partner, and I don't want to be with you anymore. I don't want to be here. I want to be with someone who loves me and supports me and encourages me and uplifts me, not someone who puts me down. I have a feeling if you said that, you'll have to assess the level of danger that is, because if you said all that and you believe he'll get angry or violent, then I don't want you to say any of that. But in a relationship where there is some communication or there is an opportunity for you to honor yourself and defend yourself, in a relationship like that, if you said all that and he realized that you were serious, like, oh boy, I better clean up my act, I have a feeling he'd say, oh, you're right, I'm so sorry, because you said he is capable of apologizing. And because it took him 2 years before he started showing all these little weird signs, then there's probably a chance of saving this. But you have to be really clear about what you want, what is important to you about a relationship, and what you will accept and what you won't accept. And you have to have those boundaries with you, and you cannot settle for less. Because as soon as you settle for less and let some small bad behaviors in, the floodgates can open. And suddenly you're back to that same place. So I need you to be aware of what you want. Be very clear, visualize it, make it real in your mind, so that when he says this, you say that, or he does this and you leave, or whatever it is for you. I can't dictate the steps. I could just give you some tools to help you figure out what steps you need to take. So there's a lot of information in this episode. It went on and on. I apologize if it's a little too long, but I really wanted to fit everything in today and give you all this information. So I had it on record for you to listen to anytime. And I want to thank the person who wrote the email. And I want to thank you for listening to another episode. I appreciate you, and please share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook. Now, I don't normally go into a long description of the workbook, but every now and then I want to explain what the workbook is about. MEAN stands for Manipulation and Emotional Abuse Number. The first section of the workbook is 200 checkboxes that you go through to assess the specific behaviors that you're experiencing in your relationship. You're not only checking boxes about how the other person behaves, but you're also recognizing your feelings as well. For example, one of the checkboxes says, before I met my partner, I felt good about myself, but that's not true anymore. So if that's true, you'd check that box. Another one is, I feel frequently misunderstood by my partner or the other person, because you can take this assessment for anyone in your life. And so if that's true, you check that off. Then there are checkboxes that say, I get reminded by my partner that I am sabotaging our relationship. Or my partner doesn't seem to care about what I value. And on and on. There's 200 checkboxes, like I said. So by the time you're done, you have a very detailed assessment that tells you specific key areas of your communication and connection that are falling apart or need improvement. After you check them all off, you count up your checkboxes, which I'll admit can be scary. but this is how you get your mean score. The score will fall under 4 classes or categories, A through D. Needless to say, the higher your score, the more manipulation and emotional abuse you're experiencing. I've often heard that the score that people get is eye-opening because the person who took the assessment was dealing with the difficulties for so long, that slow buildup of boiling water in the relationship. They were experiencing these difficulties for so long, they didn't realize that all the little behaviors and nuances that they were missing were part of a bigger whole of a toxic relationship, WHOLE. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone who takes the assessment churns out a big score. I mean, even healthy relationships can get like 30 or 40 points because both partners or people in the relationship actually want to treat each other with kindness. So what I mean by that is if you have a mean score of 30 or 40 or even higher, it doesn't mean that you're in an emotionally abusive relationship. It just means there might be toxic behavior that you need to address. And having these checkboxes checked can help you understand where you need to focus. Because typically when there's empathy and compassion in the relationship from both people, there's a good chance you can work through this. There's a good chance you can save this or move into a better space with it. And yes, you can purchase the workbook for just you or you and your partner. If you want to take it together, you just have to print out the pages so that one of you will have your own assessment. But I must warn you, it's not easy discovering the toxic components that make up your relationship. And especially, it's not easy sharing those behaviors with each other because there'll likely be surprises for each of you. And I know this is true. A woman wrote to me a few weeks ago and she said, all hell broke loose after this assessment because they did it together and they learned a lot and it was exactly what they needed to hear, but they had to go through that big hump. And I imagine they probably had conversations like, what? I don't do that to you. What? That's not true. I imagine it went like that. And I'm sorry to this person and other people who took this together, that can happen. But that kind of revelation about your relationship can jumpstart it. It can get it into a better place. That's how sometimes the healing needs to happen. Sometimes you need to hit this huge hurdle. And then when you get over it, you realize that you can start to heal. I mean, imagine you go your entire life not knowing how you're affecting the other person that you're with while they repress and resent and build anger and sadness and other negativity, but you didn't know your behavior was having that much of an impact. If you're the one doing this behavior. For the one that manipulates and controls and they didn't realize that their behavior was unhealthy, it can be surprising and humbling at the same time if they're willing to be humble. And if they're not willing to be humble, they may become very defensive, thinking that they're not the person being described, like I just said. They don't want to face that. They don't want to believe that about themselves. But they soon learn that even unintentional behavior, even when you're not trying to hurt someone, it can hurt. I mean, this is kind of a side story, but my girlfriend and I last night were talking in the kitchen and something came up and she said, it's hurtful when you say that. And it wasn't just something I said in the moment. It was something that has been building up in her. She said, when you say these things, it makes me feel like you see me as this awful person. And I said, well, what do I say? And we had a very long discussion and it was emotionally charged, but we weren't like going crazy on each other. It was just charged. You could, the type of conversation that is. And she finally said something that clicked. She finally said something that made sense to me. And she said, when you say that, it's from your experience. It's not from other people's experiences. I won't tell you the whole conversation, but she said, it really hurts me. It makes me feel like I'm no good. And she said some very important things. I was listening. I was still a little defensive, but I was listening. And then she finally said, and when you say that and it's coming from you and you make it sound like in general that's about me and not just your perception, that really hurts. And when she said that or something very much like it, I said, oh, that's bad. That's toxic behavior. And I was talking about myself. I said, that is very toxic and I'm so sorry. I don't want to do that. I don't mean to do that. But now I understand what you mean. And she laughed. It was in the middle of this emotional charge. And she laughed because I think she saw that I got it and it made her feel a little bit safer. And as soon as she laughed, it changed the entire vibe of the conversation because I admitted it. I was humbled. I came to the realization that what she was saying was correct. I just didn't understand how she got there. And when she got there, I realized, oh, that's how I'm hurting you. That's how I'm doing it. And I hope you have someone in your life that is willing to admit when they're wrong. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here. I mean, we both are capable of doing this. It's just that when it happens, it just feels better. It feels better to get off my soapbox and say, you know what? I was wrong about that. It's scary in the moment because I don't want to say it. I'll admit it. I don't want to say it. But at the same time, if it's true, I'm not going to deny it. I really think it's important to find truth. And don't let truth get skewed for you if someone's doing that to you. But my point is, coming back to the unintentional behavior can be hurtful. That's exactly what was happening. I did not intend to hurt. And even though I talk about this stuff, I teach this stuff, I'm still capable of doing it without even knowing I'm doing it. So there are people out there like that don't even realize they're doing it, which is why it's important to have serious, honest conversations like this. And, you know, the workbook can be a conversation starter, that's for sure. But it's not always recommended that both people take it. Like for the person in an emotionally abusive relationship who takes this assessment on their own, it gives them a chance to finally figure out what exactly is going on instead of being so confused. I mean, they finally identify the behaviors. And sometimes for the first time since the relationship began, they finally know what to call what they are experiencing. They finally know what to label it. So I'm not saying it's a good idea for all couples to take this together. And it doesn't have to be just couples. Like I said before, it can be family members too and friends, whoever it is in your life. But for the two people that actually talk to each other and really want the relationship to work and they're willing to do whatever it takes, the workbook could be the ticket they need to bring up the details that they need to work on. Now, the assessment isn't where the workbook ends, and I promise that I know this sounds like an infomercial, but I wanted to describe the entire workbook if you've been on the fence, and also make some comments as I go. So I'm hoping there's some value here for you as well. After the relationship assessment, I tell you what to do to process what you've learned. I also tell you what you should start doing right away if you want things to get better, or if they can't get better, what else you need to do so that you don't continue to suffer through what might be an unresolvable situation. The workbook will help you through the choices that you need to make, whether you want to stay in the relationship or not. Another section of the workbook are examples of what you'll hear the manipulative or abusive person say if you choose to leave or start thinking about leaving. For example, the person who wrote the email today, she might hear certain statements that he makes that causes her to stay, but not in a loving way necessarily. Like the workbook makes you aware of the kinds of statements that you probably shouldn't take personally so that you don't get sucked back into a controlling situation. A comment like, "I never loved you anyway." That could be hurtful. And you may feel so hurt that you decide to stay. I know that sounds strange. If somebody says, "I never loved you anyway," why would you stay? But some people think that their only source of love is from the person who says things like that. And that's simply not true, but they'll say things like that knowing it'll hit you hard. Some people use that as an emotional attack. They want to make you feel vulnerable and wounded so that they can sweep in and save you. It's hurtful. Another thing they might say is, "Do you really think you're going to get anyone else at your age? Or the way you look, or how much weight you gained, or whatever." They're going to say things that really hit your heart. How about, "I can't believe you do this to your own children." Comments like that really pull at your heart because they know exactly what to say to make sure that you do what they want you to do. In the workbook, I give you many of the comments and the hurtful words they'll use so that you don't fall for them. I don't want you to fall for these words because these words aren't true. They make it sound true, and then you're focused on those words and you think, "Oh, if that's the truth, what am I going to do now?" They try to change your decisions. You got to remember that many words from a desperate person losing control are designed to affect you emotionally to help them stay in control. It's like if I told you that by not listening to this show, it proves that you don't love yourself. How awful is that? That's just terrible. That would be a terribly abusive thing for me to say. But at some level, there might be a part of you that falls for it because deep down, if you have insecurities and fears like we all do, it plays on those things. Now, I want you to erase what I just said. Your love for yourself has nothing to do with listening to this show. In fact, it's a completely ridiculous comment that if you accept it as true, you'll end up feeling so guilty that you will feel compelled to keep listening. That's what manipulation is all about. Controlling, manipulative people say things to make you feel bad so that the only way out of feeling bad is to agree with them and do as they say. Because they'll make you believe that in order to feel good about yourself, you have to do what they want instead. I know some of this is scary stuff, and some of you are living with it right now. But this is why I'm sharing this, so that if you're not, or it hasn't happened yet, I want you to be aware of this stuff. Like another comment a manipulative person might say is, "What do you think our friends will think? Don't you realize how bad you'll look if you leave me?" That's another manipulative comment to force you to go inside and think about your behavior so that you won't do the behavior they don't want you to do. But it's just a bunch of phony baloney. They're feeding your head with all this crap to make you focus on that stuff instead of what you need to focus on, which is preserving yourself, honoring yourself, doing the healthiest thing for you. People who love you want you to be happy. They don't make you feel bad. People who love you want to support the path that makes you happy. They want to help you become healthier. They don't say things to knock you down a notch. Like that comment, "What do you think our friends will think?" Of course your friends are going to have opinions, but you already knew that. And of course they may talk behind your back and make up all kinds of stories about what happened to the relationship. There's no avoiding that anyway. I think we all do that. Like, I wonder why they broke up. Do you think it was this? Do you think it was that? I mean, in healthier relationships, neither one of you would ever say, "If you leave, think about how bad it will look to others." A healthy relationship, that doesn't come out. That kind of statement is so ridiculous because it has nothing to do with the relationship and is absolutely crafted to make you doubt your own decisions and focus on things that don't really matter at all, because they're going to happen no matter what. People are going to talk, at least in this example. It's just that the manipulative person brought it up to highlight it for you so that they make sure they never lose control over you. After all, if you take on the burden of what your friends and family think, you'll never, ever do anything for yourself. Ever. And that's a terrible space to be in. And it's likely where you've been the whole time in this type of relationship, under their thumb, which is so toxic and even dangerous because your sense of self-worth diminishes every day someone uses that kind of manipulation against you. Anyway, that's another topic for another day. Let me tell you about the rest of the workbook. It includes many pieces of advice to help you survive and thrive. It's got a list of very helpful resources. You get access to a private Facebook group and also some bonus audios that you can listen to instead of read, including 3 interviews with survivors, one of them being my girlfriend. And she shares her struggles with an ex-sociopath husband. So if you ever wondered what Ashta sounds like, that's your chance. You can listen to her on that audio. And she has quite a story. He was definitely not a nice guy. So the audios alone are very educational, and depending on the depth of difficulty that you're experiencing, you may resonate deeply with them. And just a few other sprinkles here. The workbook comes with reflections and small exercises, helping you to connect with deeper learnings inside yourself. There's a perfect partner worksheet that you can fill out. There's a list of principles for self-empowerment. So for those of you who bought the Overwhelmed Brain book, you'll recognize that list. And also interactions that I've copied from many of the emails that I've received over the years. I take the best parts of the email and I share them with you to help you gain some more understanding and perhaps maybe some wisdom that you can take with you. Something that you can put in that mind of yours while you visualize all the steps that you'll want to take for yourself. So there you go. The infomercial is over. I wanted to explain the workbook for those who wanted to know what it was all about before they made the purchase. Is it right for me kind of thing? And if it's not, and the show is enough, that's all I care about. I really want you to get the information. If you want to do the assessment, then go to loveandabuse.com, because the workbook is a powerful relationship assessment and healing tool. It'll help you pinpoint the exact behaviors causing the difficulties in your relationship, including identifying all the signs of possible emotional abuse. Go to loveandabuse.com and download the workbook today. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone. and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant. Because you are. Thank you again for joining me today. We'll talk again soon.